So this will be our third leg of the emotional sobriety group. And we actually have interest in doing an emotional sobriety meeting maybe midweek after this. So, and with that, like I said, our speaker tonight, very kindly, when I heard him speak on the subject, I thought, wow, I wonder if I could possibly get him to come and do a workshop with us. And he very kindly offered to do so. And now he's back. He even offered to come back and do it again. So really appreciate that. And I'll turn it over now to Alan.
Okay. Can you hear me okay, Patrick?
I can, Alan. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much first of all, for even creating this opportunity to discuss emotional sobriety. This is week number 3. And if you weren't here for the first or to the second workshop, I do believe Patrick has links to those recordings and that he'll be able to share them with you. So please do that. So because I'm going to review briefly what's happened in week 1 and 2, and then get into what we're going to do in week 3. And then hopefully there'll be a part 4, Patrick. We'll talk about that at the end of the meeting. Just really briefly, I'm in recovery now for over 49 years. My journey started back in 1971. And it's been an incredible journey. I mean, how do you get here from there? It's still in many ways just a grace, right, has entered my life in so many ways. And I feel so grateful to be here today and to be sharing this with you. I came in the program, a high school dropout. I got inspired to help people as well as got inspired for my recovery. And I ended up going back to school and becoming a clinical psychologist. So I have a doctorate in clinical psychology from UC Davis. And it's been a wonderful intersection, if you will, between my personal recovery and what I've learned professionally. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today, is some of the things that I've learned about this issue that Bill started talking about back in the 1950s, right? And Bill really introduced this whole concept of emotional sobriety to the recovery community in 1950. He was writing the 12 and 12, and he actually said, as you're going to see in a little bit, that if we work these steps, it's going to facilitate the achievement of emotional sobriety. Well, that's what we've been exploring. The first workshop we did was exploring this incredible letter that Bill wrote in 1956. It was published in the 1958 Grapevine under the title of Emotional Sobriety, The Next Frontier. That letter is readily available on Google. If you type in that letter, Bill Wilson's name, emotional sobriety in the letter, you'll be able to pull it up. And I encourage all of you, get that letter, keep it as a part of your literature. In my opinion, this is Bill's 4th legacy. The first legacy being the 12 steps, he and Dr. Bob. Second legacy being the traditions. Third legacy being the general service office. And I really believe emotional sobriety is the 4th legacy that Bill left us. So let me jump into this whole thing. Like I said, the first week I introduced you to the letter. And then last week, Brian, one of my colleagues here in the United States, and he's been a student of mine in my training program, came on and shared with you about the emotional center of gravity. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll jump right into my talk today.
Oh my God.
So everybody can see that okay? Patrick, we okay with that?
Yeah, I believe so. I saw it come up. Kathleen, looking.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay.
Okay, good. All right, we're good to go. So this is going to be part 3. Today, we're really going to try to understand emotional sobriety. And I want to answer the questions a lot of people had in the first workshop I did, is what can we do to achieve emotional sobriety. And that's what I want to get in today, is really looking at what does this mean for us as we live our lives today. So that's the goal of this. I'm going to introduce you to a way of unpacking your emotional disturbances. And I think as we go along this morning, you're going to see the value of that. But before I do, I just want to do a quick review of some of the key concepts from part 1 and 2 of this workshop that we had. So this is what Bill said about emotional sobriety when he was writing the 12 and 12. He goes, here we begin to practice all of the steps of the program in our daily lives so that we and those about us can find emotional sobriety. So he expressly stated that the purpose of working the steps is to achieve emotional sobriety. So, of course, one of the big questions comes up, well, why? What makes this so important? Well, I really believe that this is the key to living a happy, satisfying, and having serene in our life. This whole issue of emotional sobriety creates emotional freedom, or what Bill Wilson liked to call a true independence of spirit. And I think you're going to see as we go through this, just like I have, is that there's a lot of things that have happened in my life and a lot of beliefs I hold that interfere with being able to show up and really learn how to cope with life on life's terms. And that's what recovery is all about. It's really growing us in this direction of being able to deal with life as life presents itself to us, rather than trying to control people and circumstances around us. I'll say a lot more about that as we dig into this stuff. But this is Ernie Larson. And emotional sobriety is about stage 2 recovery, or stage 2 recovery is about emotional sobriety. And this is what Ernie Larson said about stage 2 recovery. He says, dealing with the mountain of living, right? All of those challenges that we have to face. He goes, this is what stage 2 recovery is all about. It's about getting on with life. Now pay attention to this, by facing those patterns, habits, and attitudes that control your life, and which for perhaps the first time you are clear-headed, sober, or emotionally sound enough to face. So I really want you to take that in for a minute. Emotional sobriety is about facing these patterns, habits, and attitudes we have that control our lives. Sigmund Freud said, we are being lived by the forces within us. Nothing could have been more true than to state that. A lot of these patterns, habits, and attitudes exist outside of our awareness. We're aware of some of them, especially when they pop up and cause trouble in our life, right? But they exist. And some of these things, as we say in the program all the time, more will be revealed to us, right? More will be revealed to us. And that's what happens here as we start this work. As you're going to start this work today, you're going to see some of these things. I think, for me, it's going to be the low-hanging fruit is going to be the first stuff that we pick, right? And that we identify with, that we see. But as we continue this work, it deepens and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So this is what Bill said.
I think many oldsters who have put our booze cure to severe but successful tests still find that they often lack emotional sobriety. Perhaps they will be the spearhead for the next major development in AA, the development of much more real maturity and balance, which is to say, humility, in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God.
So this was the second time I found in the literature that Bill had used the phrase emotional sobriety, but here he defined it. And he did not define it in the 12 and 12 because that wasn't the purpose of that, other than that if you look at what the steps do, they do help us understand what emotional sobriety is about and how we do achieve this emotional freedom. But here he defined it as real maturity and balance. real maturity, I want you to think of maturity as the transcendence of environmental support to self-support, to the achievement of self-support. So when we first come into this world, we're completely dependent on our caregivers to survive. We can't do it ourselves. If we were left unto our own, we would all perish. So what happens is this dependency we have that is natural early on in life, as we grow, we become more and more able to literally stand on our own 2 feet. And that force is strong in each person. You know, I've said this in my talk before, and it's worth repeating now. No one had to stand over us and tell us when we were crawling that it was time to pull ourselves up on a table and start to experiment with walking. That desire to be what you can be is hardwired in us. It's a part of who we are. This force that moves us to grow in that direction, to move in the direction of being able to stand and support ourselves, first physically. And what does a child, what do we call the terrible twos? The child starts to say what? No, I want to do it myself. Well, where does that come from? Did anybody have to say, all right, it's time to say no? No, we wanted to say no because we want to be our own person. That desire to be ourselves, to march to our own beat, to stand on our own 2 feet is really strong. But as you're going to see, there's a lot of things that interfere with us getting to that place. So real maturity and balance in our life, well, balance is balancing out a lot of different things. You know, Bill said in the 12 and 12, when he was talking about it, he says, there was never enough of what we thought we needed. Never enough of what we thought we needed to be okay. That's our problem. We're addicted to more, and we're thinking that more is going to solve the problem for us. It's going to make us feel okay, and it doesn't. But I like what William Blake says, if a fool persists in his folly, he will become wise. If a fool persists in his follies, he will become wise. Well, we're a ship of fools, aren't we, Patrick? We're a ship of fools. Welcome to the ship of fools. I wish I had that Doors song I could play when I say that. That would be wonderful. So he goes on to define this as humility, and he talks about humility in our relationship with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. Well, it does beg the question of, well, what is humility? And last time when I spoke, I talked about humility, and I got this definition from the American Psychological Association's Dictionary of Psychology. And they define humility as the quality of being humble. That makes sense. But it's characterized by a low focus on the self. Well, yeah, right. We need that, right? Self-will on riot. That we think is the root of our problem. Selfishness, self-will on riot. And they go on to define it as an accurate, not an over or underestimated sense of one's accomplishments and worth. And this is very important in terms of the work we're going to do today. And an acknowledgement of one's limitations, imperfections, mistakes, gaps in knowledge, and so on. So what it's essentially saying is that we face ourselves as we are. We let go of any expectations of who we think we should be, who we're supposed to be. We let go of any image we think we have to be okay. And instead, we face ourselves as we are today in our lives. And this becomes the paradoxical nature of change for us, right? We change when we own who we are and what we're doing, like we did in step one, when we're powerless over alcohol. As soon as I own that and I admit that and accept that, now a new possibility exists. That's what happens here in recovery. It's about paradox, right? It's about accepting where we are now. And as we accept where we are now, the possibility of changing becomes available to us. In fact, I love to define recovery as the discovery of new possibilities. Recovery is the discovery of new possibilities. And that's what we're doing here today. You're going to discover the new possibility of emotional sobriety as we talk about this thing. So last time Brian was here, he went into a great deal in talking to you guys about a concept that I brought into the emotional sobriety literature from Dr. Karen Horney. She was a brilliant, brilliant therapist, psychoanalyst. In fact, many saw her as a neo-Freudian, really bringing Freudian psychology into relational psychology. And she talked about this concept of us all having an emotional center of gravity. Now, when our emotional center of gravity is over our 2 feet, we're supporting ourselves. We're taking care of ourselves. We're doing what we need to do. When each of us, when we're born, our center of gravity is over our own 2 feet, right? When a child is hungry, what do? They somehow communicate, that they need some food. If they're tired, they're going to let us know they're tired. If they need to urinate or defecate, they just do that, whether they got a diaper on or not. How many parents have been, had a child pee on them when they're changing a diaper? The child just does what the child needs to do. They are completely responsive to their needs. But what happens through a series of experiences, that emotional center of gravity gets put outside of ourselves. And we start to get all these ideas of who we should be to be okay. I'm okay if I look a certain way. I'm okay if I've been successful or if I have a certain amount of things. I mean, Dr. Eric Fromm described this as I am more the more I have. That's the obsession we have with this more thing. So we become okay if. I'm okay if, I said this last time. Somebody's not muted. Can you mute yourself, please? So, I'm okay if Susie Valinsky liked me at the playground while I was in elementary school over at Bobine. And this I'm okay if is really a problem because it really starts to reveal what Bill called our emotional dependence. That I'm okay if things turn out to be the way that I think they're supposed to be, if things turn out the way I'd like them to. I'm okay if people and circumstances do what I want them to do. And this is the immaturity that each of us has. That when Bill talked about real maturity and balance, he was talking about that as long as we demand that life and people act a certain way for us to be okay, we've created an impossible way of life that's going to turn us into control freaks. We're going to constantly try to control people, places, and things to do what we want them to do so we're okay. That's putting the cart before the horse. We're not going to be able to regulate the world for us to be okay. Our job is to figure out how to deal with life on life's terms. And that's what maturity looks like. The movement from environmental support to self-support. So what we're looking for in emotional sobriety is to take this emotional center of gravity, put it back into ourselves. So we're okay even if things don't turn out the way that we want them to. And to get to I'm okay even if means that I have to learn how to cope with life as it is, not as I would like it. This becomes a very important part. Now, how do we get to the I'm okay even if? Well, we have to look at some of the things that cause us trouble. So emotional sobriety involves keeping our emotional center of gravity over our own 2 feet. It's anchored in our actual or true self or our true essence. So here's the problem in a nutshell. Life happens, and it's going to happen. One thing that we know of is that life keeps presenting what's next, right? Whatever it is. We've been confronted that globally with this pandemic, right? And COVID, and learning how do we cope with this thing in our life. But what happens is we, instead of coping, we object to it. We say it's not supposed to be this way. And now, because we're objecting and struggling with accepting reality as it is, we're unable to mobilize the forces in us that are going to cope with it. And instead we complain, we feel sorry for ourselves, We go into all kinds of trips about getting angry, resentful. I mean, all kinds of things that keep us from learning how to show up in our life in a good way, learning how to have some emotional sobriety. Now, I believe that's underneath this is a lack of faith in ourselves to cope with life on life's terms. And this leads to our emotional dependency. And that lack of faith comes from, look, not many of us had any coaching around this stuff. My parents really didn't know how to cope with life on life's term. My father died of cancer when I was 11 years old. My grandfather, I remember him just being so grief struck. And one of the things that he would lament about over and over again is you're not supposed to bury your son. Your son is supposed to bury you. My dad died when he was 39 years old. He was the only child. So my grandfather was just devastated by this. My mom was devastated. She says, this isn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to grow old with your father. I'm 11. I'm saying this isn't supposed to happen. My dad's supposed to be around until I become an adult. I need him, I need to turn to him. I need to deal with him. Why did this happen to me? Why didn't this happen to other people? What went on? I didn't know how to cope with that loss in my life. That became an incredible trauma. And shortly after that, 6 months later, I found myself, having my first experience with alcohol. I remember a guy handed me a cold Old Style. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and Old Style was one of the beers that they made in the Midwest. And he handed me an Old Style, and I had that first beer. And I tell people this all the time. I don't know if I was born an alcoholic, but the minute I drank that beer, an alcoholic was born, because it worked. It connected me to myself, and I was able to be free from all of the pain and all of the struggle and all of the other issues that were going on at 12 years old. It seems like, God, 12 years, how do you amass such a major number of issues? But I had them, right? I had this insecurity. I didn't feel, good enough, all kinds of things. And then my dad passes away. I didn't know how to deal with that. So let's define emotional sobriety, and let's get into a definition of it. And then we're going to explore how to unpack this thing. So this is the definition that is actually going to appear in my new book that's going to be coming out in June, 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety. And this is, I think, the best work that I've done in terms of books I've published. So here I describe emotional sobriety as a mental state in which we do not react to our changing emotions as though they were infallible guides to the truth, and therefore the governing facts of our lives. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's very important to understand that as we mature, not only do we learn how to be self-supporting, but we also start to have a separation in our mind between our emotions and our thoughts. You see, when we're immature and currently starting out in life, we're just one with our emotions and our thoughts. Our thoughts and our emotions were just fused together. And if we grow ourselves and differentiate ourselves, that as we differentiate through life, we start to have a separation between our emotions and our thoughts. And just because I feel a certain way, it doesn't mean that that's the truth. In fact, Bill had a great line in the book. He says, guard against contempt prior to investigation. And the reason he's introducing ideas like that, or the pause, is because he's saying, stop and really get yourself centered so you can get perspective on what's going on. That's what emotional sobriety is about. It's getting this perspective so that the best in us can run the rest of us. But if I just respond from my emotions and I think this is the way it is, I can be going off and going down a rabbit hole and chasing something that's not even a reality. I was working with a client the other last week, and she runs a treatment center out here, and they have she owns a treatment center, and they have a new director. And he said something to her that made her feel very upset, emotionally upset. Like, is he telling me that I can't do this at my treatment center, and that I can't initiate this and all? And she drew all these conclusions based on the feeling she had that she was being told what to do. And when she went and checked it out with him, none of it was true. It was a complete distortion on herself, on her part. And how many times does that happen to us, right? When we think something's going on or things are going a certain way and it's not going on at all, and that it's our emotions that are coloring the situation, we end up, because of our emotional dependency, we end up taking many things personally that are not personal. And so as we differentiate, we stop taking things personally in our life. I go on to say, just as physical sobriety emerges as we gain independence from our addictive urges, emotional sobriety emerges as we gain freedom from our emotional storms. We recognize that our emotions are reactions to people and conditions around us, and we give them simply the amount of attention that is reasonable or fitting for the specific situation that we find ourselves in. Emotional sobriety develops when we accept life on its terms rather than demanding that life, people, and situations conform to our expectations. When we do this, we gain emotional freedom. We gain a true independence of spirit in which our innermost or truest self is the determining force in our lives. So emotional sobriety is an appropriate balance and coordination of all that we are. It is when we bring into harmony the disharmonious aspects of ourselves so that they can be joint contributors to our wholeness. And when we balance our need for togetherness with our desire to hold on to our separateness. It is when the best in us does the thinking and talking for all of us. That's what emotional sobriety is. Well, it's an incredible thing. And and what we talk about is achieving it means that we continue to strive and we make progress along these lines. Nobody's going to pull this thing off perfectly in life. So here's the key in terms of us starting to understand it. Bill said this in step 10, that it's a spiritual axiom that every time that we're disturbed, no matter what the cause, and we got to get this is unconditional, no matter the cause, there's something wrong with us. Every time we're disturbed, there's something wrong with us. Well, how do we get at what's wrong? How can we identify what's going on with this? Well, Bill has a suggestion for us.
If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender these hobbling demands. Then we can be set free to live and love. We may then be able to gain emotional sobriety.
Okay, so in today's workshop, what we're going to be looking at is how do we examine the disturbances we have, whether they're a big deal or not, and how can we identify this unhealthy dependence and the consequent demands that are generated by that unhealthy dependence. Once we can do that, once we become aware of what we're doing, then we can surrender these demands, right? Then we can let go of these things, but we need to become aware. And this is one of the 12 essential insights to emotional sobriety. We have to increase our awareness. We have to increase our consciousness if we're going to do this. You cannot continue to use the consciousness that created the problem to solve it. You have to expand your consciousness. And that's what I love about recovery. There are so many opportunities for us to become more and more aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it. Once we get there, once we see what these demands are or these unenforceable rules, so think about the consequent demands as also unenforceable rules. They're ideas that we have, that we generate about how life is supposed to be, and then we expect life to live up to those things. Once we see these things, we can let them go. And when we let them go, then we're set free to live in love. We're set free to learn how to cope. We can increase our capabilities and handle situations. So how do we do this? Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that, but I want to emphasize the importance of taking responsibility for what we're doing. This is Fritz Perls, founder of Gestalt Therapy, and he says, as long as you fight a symptom, it will become worse. If you resist seeing your emotional dependency, you are not going to be able to deal with it. Just like when we resisted facing our powerlessness over alcohol, we continued to try to control our drinking, and what happened, right? You know, what do we say the definition of insanity is? Continuing to do the same thing. And in program, we say we're expecting different results, but I think we're crazier than that. We expect better results. We do the same thing expecting better results, not just different. We think it's going to be better this time. It's never better. We get worse over a period of time. So he says, as long as you fight a symptom, it's going to become worse. And we know that. Those of us that try to control our drinking knows what happened when we did that. If we take responsibility for what we're doing to ourselves, how we produce our symptoms, how we produce our illness, how we produce our existence, how we produce our disturbance is what even Bill is saying. Then we get in touch with ourselves. Then growth begins. Then we can start to grow up. Then integration begins. Now we learn how to stand on our own 2 feet. Well, this is Dr. Viktor Frankl, and he's saying something very similar to this. And this is the importance of seeing this stuff. This is the stimulus and response. And what he says here is that there's a space between the stimulus and our response. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. In that space lies our emotional sobriety. We need to try to live there. And that's what unpacking our disturbance needs is about. This goes back to what Bill is talking about in step 10, continue to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. It's the spot check inventory. If I'm upset, how can I figure out what's going on with me? And that's the invitation that Bill created for us. This is Virginia Satir. She says the same way. Life is not what it's supposed to be. It is what it is. It's the way we cope with it that makes a difference. So let's look at how to unpack this stuff. Well, this is the emotional dependency inventory or the emotional sobriety inventory. You could call it different ways. You can download this form. I'll show you it in another thing on my website. My website is simply www.abphd.com. www.abphd.com. Somebody could put that in chat. That would be appreciated. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to define what's upsetting us, what bothers us. So let me give you an example from somebody I worked with in my practice. So his upsetting event was that he walked in, it was a Thursday night. He walked in after getting 6 months of sobriety, picked up his chip over at the Lano Club, walked in and said, "Look, honey, I got 6 months." Well, his wife, she was watching Bones at that point in time, and she looks up from the couch and she goes, "So what?" and looks back at the TV. Well, he was immediately offended, upset, angry with her. He got upset. He stormed up, stomped upstairs to his room. His first thought was, "I'm going to go take a drink. You know, we'll see if she doesn't care about my recovery. Well, you know, let's see how she feels after I go pick up, a pint down at the liquor store down around the corner." And then he thought a little better about himself. He had 6 months, so he paused a little bit and he says, "Okay, that's going to hurt me. It's like drinking poison to get back at somebody. So I'm not going to do that, but I'm just going to withdraw from her. I'm not going to talk to her. I'm just too angry with her." It's filled with resentment. We know that that's not a good place to be in. Now, that's what happened, and that's how he reacted to it. Now, what was underneath that? Remember what Bill said to us, right? that when we're disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with us. Well, what's wrong with him? What's going on? Now, this is where Bill said we have to look at the unhealthy dependence and the consequent demands. So what it means is underneath each unhealthy dependence, we have a rule, an unreasonable expectation. Now, his was that he wanted her to feel good about what he was doing, regardless of what he had done to her. This was the third time he got his 6-month chip. And his unreasonable expectation was that she was going to jump up, become his cheerleader after she had been disappointed and devastated so many times. She didn't want to get back on that emotional merry-go-round again. And he couldn't appreciate that. And his dependence was that the value of his sobriety depended on her reaction. He was thinking of throwing the whole thing down the tubes because she was upset with him. Or because she didn't respond. It's better to say that she didn't respond the way that he thinks that she should have. Well, there was no room for her in that. He's not thinking about what this meant to her at all. He's demanding that she thinks about it his way, the way he wants her to think about his recovery. Well, does that sound selfish? Does that sound self-centered? Does that sound like self-will run riot? To me, it does. So what has to happen? What does he need to do to stay centered? Well, he has to come back and get centered over his 2 feet again. Remember the emotional center of gravity? He put it in his wife. He put that emotional center of gravity in her, that his recovery depended on how she was feeling, that how he was feeling depended on whether she was approving of what he was doing or not. Well, what he needed to do to stay centered was to take back that emotional center of gravity. So how do we identify those unenforceable rules? Well, we can use this if, fill in the blank, in this case, if she would have celebrated his recovery, he would have felt fine. He was dependent on how she felt for how he was going to feel about what he was doing in his recovery. Well, manipulation is the most dangerous threat to our emotional sobriety and our emotional nourishment. He was manipulating her to do for him what he couldn't do for himself. Remember, maturity is the movement from environmental support to self-support. Instead of looking at her to make him feel good, he needed to be able to ground feeling good about his recovery and what he was doing, and not how she was feeling about it. So let's take a look at how this plays out in an actual situation.
We're talking about this emotional sobriety form. I asked you guys to fill them out. And I said, does anybody want to volunteer and talk about what they put on their form? And you put your hand up. And so here we are now in front of all your colleagues. I mean, there's 300 social workers out here.
That's it?
It's just 300. It probably feels like a lot more than that right now. But, what I want to acknowledge, first of all, look, it takes a lot of courage for you to come up, because I imagine this is going to get pretty personal. So what, as you know, that first column is what's the event that upset you? What happened?
My wife just won't do the dishes.
She won't do the dishes. Mm-hmm. Tell me what.
It's not really, it sounds
really
it's
simple,
petty,
but there's more to it. I know that.
Okay, so, look, I work a lot, all right? And she doesn't work right now. We have a 6-month-old daughter. Mm-hmm. And I ask that when I come home, I'm talking like, if you add up the commute that I do to go to work because of where we live, right? I work probably about 11, 12 hours a day. So I come home and there's dishes in the sink. Who's fucking doing them?
Right.
Me. And all I ask that she does throughout the day, I'm saying, like, I pay the bills, she can do whatever she wants. And I respect that she takes care of her child.
Yes.
But just do the dishes. Because they're not my dishes.
So when they're not done and you walk in, what happens? What do you do then? So that's the second column.
Well,
so you walk in, I get what's upsetting you now.
Right.
You told her that this is important to me. She's not doing it. Is it all the time she's not doing it, or most of the time?
it's most of the time, well, I'd say it's all the time. She only does it if I text her ahead of time and tell her. And like my whole point is, why do I have to fucking text you ahead of time to tell you to do the fucking dishes?
That's the second part that upsets you. All right, I got it. So now let's go to that next column. So what happens when you walk in, you see the dishes aren't done, what do you do? What's the first thing you do?
Well, I have two options, right? I lose my shit,
Yeah,
which I don't want to,
right.
which turns into probably me out of the apartment, right?
I mean, she'd put you out of the apartment? Or?
Probably.
Yeah.
It's happened before.
Right.
Or I just shut off.
How do you shut off? What do you do?
I'd sit on the couch.
You sit on the couch. What do you do while you're on the couch? What?
This is embarrassing.
Isn't
I sit on the couch and I play Angry Birds.
Angry Birds?
Yeah.
Well, how fitting that is, isn't it? I mean, you're playing Angry Birds.
I play Angry Birds. Yeah.
And then what happens? You're on the couch playing Angry Birds.
Well, I'd fucking shut off, man. I don't like.
So she'll walk
I don't
by,
want.
she'll say,
yeah, because
"Hi,
because what she does is she wants to tell me about her day and tell me about all the shit, and all I can fucking think about is she didn't do the fucking dishes.
Right.
So I don't care. You need money for this. You want money for the car insurance. Great. Do the fucking dishes. Do your part.
So you just cut off. You just emotionally shut down, distance yourself.
Yeah, because the other way doesn't work right now.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, yeah, blowing up
And I
shutting
have-
down.
and I don't have control
The
of
truth
it.
is that they're not very dissimilar, right? They're really opposite sides of the same coin. Don't worry about that right now.
Okay.
We'll get to that some other point.
All right.
So then this is the important thing. So the rule you have, the unenforceable rule is that you demand that she does those dishes, right? That's your rule. So would it be would this be safe to say? You'd say it this way: if you loved me, you would do the dishes. Right?
Yeah.
If you loved
Yeah.
me, you'd do the dishes.
Yeah.
If you loved me, you'd
Yeah.
respect some of what I want from
I asked
you.
one thing, so yeah.
One thing, right. And you sound like you make it a small thing, because I want to say to you, that's not a small thing. You're asking her a lot. And I'll explain what I mean by that later. And I know that like, you're going, what do you mean? What are you talking? It's just one thing. No,
Yeah, like I'm thinking
it's a lot. You
okay.
want her to do the dishes every day, regardless of what's going on in her life. And see, that's what I mean. You're not asking for her a small thing. You're asking her to totally disregard what's important for her and to pay attention to what's important to you. See, that's the rule.
Right. Okay. I want.
Let's go a little farther with it, though. Okay. See, because so then what you're saying is the dependency now that you have is that your love for her and your good feelings for her are dependent on her doing what you want her to do. See, that's what you're setting up here. And so there's no possibility, you're not creating any possibility outside of this demand for her to be connected to you. So you're saying, if we have the relationship on my terms, then we're okay. But if you're not going to meet me on my terms, then hell with you. And you throw her away. I mean, you act like she's throwing you away, but I'll tell you, man, you're throwing her away.
What kind of feels like she is?
Of course you do, because your demand is that she's supposed to do this. All right, look, here's the real important thing. What do you think makes those dishes so important? What's that really about? What happens when you see those dishes? What does that trigger in you, man? That's got to connect to something.
Well, okay. My mom, when I was a kid, I come home from school, and I would judge the night based on if the dishes were in the sink or not.
And if they were in the sink, what would happen that night?
If the dishes were in the sink, it meant that my mom was drinking that night.
And what was going to happen that night if mom was drinking?
Nothing good.
What does nothing good mean, Andrew?
She's just fucking angry, man. She was just angry. She'd have guys over I'd never seen before. I didn't eat. She'd come in my room and yell at me. Sometimes she'd let the guys do stupid shit to me, I guess.
Wow. You weren't safe if you saw the dishes in the sink, were you?
No.
That somehow when you come home and those dishes aren't done, all of this stuff with your mom is right there again, man.
Mm-hmm.
See, a lot of times what happens is that we demand that our future reverse the experiences of our past. But it doesn't work that way. See, what we need to do, we could start it right now, but it's going to take a lot of this. You got a lot to say to your mom. We got a lot of stuff to work through with your mom. And that's not going to go away by demanding your wife do the dishes, man. That's going to go away by you opening up a lot of this pain, which is, I see how hard it is for you. I understand that. But when you keep avoiding it and you keep doing these other things, you're not doing yourself, you're not doing your marriage a favor at all.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so I'll just take you through that in terms of what Andrew realized. So his event, right? What upset him coming home, dishes not being done. He tells her that she wants him to do the dishes. What his reaction was, at times he'd blow up, get angry about it, and then, make her feel bad that she wasn't being a quote good wife and all that other nonsense he did to try to manipulate her. And then, when that manipulation didn't work, he just went ahead and withdrew from her, sat on the couch. I thought it was so funny. He's playing Angry Birds, right? How fitting that play Angry Birds on the couch. She tries to talk to him. He's withdrawn. What was his unenforceable rule? Well, that she should do those dishes whenever he thought she should do the dishes, so that he didn't, so that, if he said that I want you to do these dishes, if you love me, it means that you will do what I want you to do. See, that was his unenforceable rule. If you love me, you'll give me what I'm asking for. And how come that became so important? Well, yeah, we can understand it, that nobody was really paying attention to what he wanted and what was important to him. So he was hoping that his future would turn that around. But that's not how that happens. It has to be, if we go back to the St. Francis prayer, if I want love, then give love. If I want understanding, give understanding. I can't make these demands without it being somehow a reciprocal relationship. His unhealthy dependence, or his underlying reaction, right, is in that generated this unenforceable rule, right, was that his love for her depended on her doing what he wanted her to do. And it was a mess, because now he's dependent on her for her good feelings towards her. She has to behave the way he wants her to behave. So it destroys any possibility of having a good relationship. Why is it that we save our worst behavior for those people we love and care about? Because somehow we feel that when someone loves us and we love them, that we have a right to make demands on them, unlike we would make of anyone else. We treat strangers much better than we treat people we love and care about. What is he asked to do to stay centered and emotionally balanced? He's got to give up this rule and expectation. If he doesn't like and he's got to deal with some of the trauma that's creating this, there's no question about that. But in terms of his relationship with his wife, that if he doesn't like the dishes when he comes home, then do them. And don't put it on her. Get up and do the dishes if there's something that's bothering you. But to expect her to do everything that he wants her to do for him to feel okay it's not going to work, no matter what kind of games he plays to try to make her feel that way. So the emotional dependency and demands generated by unhealthy dependency creates this blaming mentality which hinders our ability to learn. If only she could change, he would have a great marriage. That's never true. The person that's in our life creates trouble for us, and that trouble is an invitation to us growing up. Relationships, grow people, and they grow people through trouble. And trouble in a relationship doesn't mean something is wrong. It means that there's an opportunity for us to grow up, is what happens. And that's true with all kinds of trouble in our recovery as well. So the quest for greater awareness of ourselves and our world is a healthy approach to living and allows us to achieve emotional sobriety. Just think about it. If you bring 5% greater awareness to your recovery, to your life, and you start asking yourself, what are these unenforceable rules that I have? What are my expectations that are getting me upset? And how can I unhook people from these expectations I have? It's going to be a step towards your freedom. So what we're seeing is this lack of inner intimacy and self-support is the source of our emotional dependency, as well as dealing with some of these unfinished issues and trauma from our past. As we make progress towards emotional sobriety and more nourishing attitudes towards ourselves and towards life, we surrender our expectations that anyone or anything should be different from who they are or what it is at that particular moment. And now we get on with the business of coping. So when we are dissatisfied or unhappy in our relationship, we need to take a hard look at what we expect from it and our way of being in it and giving to it. We need to become aware of our habitual ways of thinking and feeling, which give rise to these patterns that we're talking about. So here's step 10. What Bill said about it in the 12 and 12 is we can try to stop making unreasonable demands upon those we love. We can stop making unreasonable demands on those we love. He goes on to say, a spot check inventory taken in the midst of such a disturbance can be a very great help in quieting our stormy emotions. So emotional sobriety creates this emotional freedom, a true independence of spirit. And this is what Bill said in the language of the heart. He goes, sobriety is only the bare beginning. It is the first gift of the first awakening, and if more gifts are to be received, our awakening has to go on. And if it does go on, we find that bit by bit by bit, we can discard the old life, the one that didn't work, for a new life that can and does work under any conditions, whatever. Regardless of worldly success or failure, regardless of pain or joy, regardless of sickness or health, or even of death itself, regardless of whether your wife does the dishes or not, a new life of endless possibilities can be lived if we are willing to continue our awakening. Emotional sobriety is how we can continue our awakening in our recovery, how we can open up some new doors to our recovery and now start to achieve, what Ernie Larson called his full recovery. What William White defined as amplified recovery. What I like to think about is optimal recovery. That's what's possible as we start to dig into this emotional sobriety.